If we just look at what's happened here, this happened so long ago, many South Africans had even forgotten about it.
Yeah, that is certainly it. It's precisely because the processes that had to be followed. This first had to go to the Judicial Service Commission, and which then referred it to Parliament. So you'll understand the lapse of time is because of the processes that needed to be undertaken.
But many people would say this is the same body that's supposed to provide some kind of oversight and perhaps even admonish judges, for example, when they don't deliver judgments on time, or if at all. If they take 11 years to resolve a matter like this, surely at the very least that sets a bad example.
Well, it's arguable. I mean, I take the point, but it's arguable because the fundamental principle of constitutional democracy is that people must be heard. And that is exactly what has happened. Because you'd remember, post the incident, it had to go to the High Court, which then found that the judge had indeed violated the law in that he drove drunk. That had to lapse. This had to go to the Judicial Service Commission, which had to review the matter and make its own finding. So it's arguable as to whether it's too long or not, given this process that had to be undertaken.
Can the finding be contested? We've already heard from legal experts who are not necessarily agreeing with what the tribunal has found.
Yes, of course it can. But let's remember, this has not reached its finality yet, because the tribunal is merely recommended to the JSC that the judge, Nkola Motata, has to be impeached. This now has to go to the National Assembly post the JSC making its own finding. So we're still at the preliminary stage. No conclusive finding has been made by the JSC. It still has to go in terms of Section 177 of the Constitution to the National Assembly by 2/3 majority deciding whether Nkola Motata should indeed be impeached or not.
We've spoken about two big offenses here, the racist language and, of course, what has now been found to have been dishonesty in the representations the judge made during his trial. What is all of this going to hang on? Racism or dishonesty?
Either or, because remember, in terms of 177 of the Constitution, he can be impeached on one of three grounds, the fundamental one being gross misconduct. So that's where the focus will be. Then the question becomes, is it gross misconduct for him to have been found to have used the language that he used as he was found guilty of in the High Court, or that he's brought the judicial institution into disrepute? So either or, it really doesn't matter, provided they find that there was in fact gross misconduct on his part.
But obviously, I mean, one of the things that we have spoken at length over the recent years has been how the judiciary, for example, has been exemplary in terms of its role, and particularly when it comes to its independence. The idea of having a judge impeached is a pretty serious step, is it not?
No, absolutely. It's probably, well, I know for a fact he will be the first one in a democratic dispensation, then yeah, I agree.
So it's not a decision that if it does get to that, that will be taken lightly?
No, of course it can't be taken lightly. It's a serious indictment on the judge. It's not to be taken lightly at all.
It's not the first time, though, that we're seeing a judge experience or at least be under this kind of, shall we call it, review. If you look at the matter of Judge John Hlophe, for example, and indeed Mabel Jansen, where are those issues as far as you know?
Well, as it stands, I understand that the Hlophe matter is going back to the JSC because remember the procedural aspects that needed to be dealt with. As I understand it now, they're reigniting that. As far as Mabel Jansen, Judge Mabel Jansen, she's resigned. So she's vacated office on the basis of the allegations that are made against her. So that's where we stand with her. She's no longer a judge of the High Court. As for the Judge President of the Western Cape, John Hlophe, it's a matter that's still pending.
It's not without some irony that in the week, or at least even on the day, that Vicky Momberg has not been granted leave to appeal for her sentencing and her case, that this has reared up. Race remains a big touch point in South Africa, and the judiciary are no exception.
There's no doubt about it. I wouldn't contrast the Mabel Jansen issue to that of Vicky Momberg, for example, because in my mind, judges should be held at a higher standard. So it's a bigger indictment if there is an allegation of racism on a judge, because remember, we're not talking about lay persons here. We're talking about people that are supposed to reinforce and enforce the law. And to an extent that there's indictment of racism on you as a judge, that is a big indictment than it is on Vicky Momberg, but I certainly take the point.
But of course, as you say, this matter is not yet finalized. We'll see how it unfolds in the coming months and indeed weeks it may be. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Stay with us. We'll have more news and, of course, a business update after this quick break.